Hello, dear friend. Now you will listen to the answers to the questions that come to mind before going to bed. Lie back and enjoy listening. Why do you need sugar? Sugar is needed by humans primarily as one of the most accessible sources of energy because it refers to simple carbohydrates that the body is able to quickly break down and use to support vital processes. When sugar enters the body, it is converted into glucose, and glucose serves as the main fuel for cells, especially for the brain and nervous system, which are almost entirely dependent on its intake. That is why, with a sharp decrease in blood sugar levels, a person feels weak, drowsy, dizzy, and has difficulty concentrating. From the point of view of evolution, the craving for sweets has a completely logical explanation. In nature, sweet taste most often signaled ripe fruits and other safe and nutritious energy sources, which means that the desire for sugar helped to survive. However, the role of sugar is not limited only to physiology. Since ancient times, it has also had cultural significance. Before widespread use, sugar was a rare and expensive product, available only to the nobility, so sweets were associated with holidays, celebrations, and a special status. Over time, when sugar became a mass-produced product, it turned into an important element of cooking, allowing not only to give food a sweet taste, but also to enhance other flavors, soften acid, balance bitterness, and create more complex and pleasant flavor combinations. In baking, sugar also performs a technological function. It participates in the processes of caramelization and Maillard reaction, due to which a golden crust and a characteristic aroma are formed. In jams and jams, sugar serves as a natural preservative, since in high concentrations it prevents the proliferation of microorganisms, allowing products to be stored longer. In the human body, sugar is involved not only in energy production, but also in mood regulation. Eating sweets stimulates the production of dopamine and serotonin, neurotransmitters associated with feelings of pleasure and calm, which is why sweet food is often perceived as a consolation or a way to relax. It is this property that makes sugar especially attractive, but at the same time dangerous when consumed excessively. When there is too much sugar in the diet, the body begins to experience overload, as excess glucose is deposited as fat or leads to metabolic disorders. In this sense, sugar is neither an absolute evil nor an absolute good, but rather a tool that is important to use in moderation. Interestingly, sugar is needed not only by humans, but also by many living organisms. Plants synthesize sugars through photosynthesis using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, and it is these sugars that form the basis of food chains. Thus, sugar lies at the foundation of life on Earth as a universal form of energy storage. Even in language and symbolism, sugar is strongly associated with something pleasant and desirable. Sweet life, sweet words, sweet dreams. This reflects the deep connection between the biological need for energy and the human desire for comfort and pleasure. Modern science increasingly emphasizes that the problem lies not in the sugar itself, but in its quantity and form of consumption. The natural sugars contained in fruits are accompanied by fiber, vitamins, and minerals, whereas refined sugar is devoid of these components and acts faster and sharper. Nevertheless, even it performs an understandable function, providing the body with fast energy and making food more attractive. Ultimately, Sugar is needed in order to support the functioning of the body and brain, enhance taste sensations, preserve foods, and connect a person's physiological needs with his cultural habits, remaining one of the simplest and at the same time the most significant substances in human history. Who is a philosopher? A philosopher is a person who reflects on the most general and fundamental questions of existence, knowledge, the meaning of life, truth, good and evil, without taking the answers for granted. The word philosopher itself comes from ancient Greek and means lover of wisdom, and this name already contains an important feature of philosophy. A philosopher is not necessarily the one who possesses the ultimate truth, but the one who strives for it, asks questions, and is not satisfied with simple explanations. In ancient times, philosophers were people who tried to understand the structure of the world without relying on myths and gods, using reason, observation, and reasoning. For them, philosophy was not a profession in the modern sense, but a way of life, a constant exercise of mind and character. The philosopher reflects on what reality is and whether it exists independently of our perception, how a person can know something, and where the boundary between knowledge and faith lies, what makes an act right or wrong, and whether human life has some higher meaning. Unlike a scientist, a philosopher is not limited to one area and does not always seek experimentally verifiable answers. He is interested in the very foundations of thinking, the framework within which science, culture, and everyday experience become possible. At the same time, philosophy is not divorced from life, as it may seem at first glance. Many philosophical ideas directly influenced how people understood freedom, justice, power, love, responsibility, and themselves. For example, philosophers' reflections on human nature underlie modern ideas about individual rights, and philosophical debates about reason and consciousness still determine the development of psychology and artificial intelligence. An important feature of a philosopher is the ability to doubt, not out of distrust or denial of everything, but out of a desire to understand more deeply. The philosopher even asks questions about concepts that seem obvious. What does it mean to be? What does it mean to think? What does I mean? This doubt requires patience and inner peace, because philosophy rarely gives quick and unambiguous answers. It often leaves a person alone with several possible points of view, each of which has its own reasons and limitations. Historically, philosophers have been itinerant teachers, court thinkers, monks, and university professors. Someone wrote treatises, someone conducted conversations in the squares, someone reflected alone. But they were all united by the desire to go beyond ordinary thinking and see the world in a broader context. The philosopher is also distinguished by his attention to language, because it is through words that a person formulates his thoughts. The analysis of concepts, the clarification of meanings, the search for hidden premises in statements, all this is an important part of philosophical work. Sometimes a philosopher seems like a person who complicates simple things, but in fact, he tries to see what these simple things consist of and why we perceive them that way. In everyday life, a philosopher can be anyone who is prone to deep thought and is not afraid to ask questions without ready answers. Philosophy does not begin with books, but with inner wonder and the feeling that the world is not exhausted by what lies on the surface. That's why you can't become a philosopher instantly by getting a degree or learning a few theories. Rather, it is a long process of forming a special attitude towards the world, in which honesty to oneself, openness to different points of view, and willingness to admit one's own ignorance are important. In this sense, a philosopher is not so much a carrier of knowledge as a researcher of human thought and existence, a person who seeks to understand how the world works and what place a person occupies in it, even if the final answer always remains a little further beyond the horizon of reflection. How were ancient books read? Reading ancient books was very different from how one reads today, and was not so much a quick and silent process as a slow, thoughtful, and often collective action. First of all, it is worth remembering that in ancient times, books in our usual form almost did not exist. Texts were written on clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, or parchment, and each such medium required special treatment. The scroll had to be unfolded gradually, holding it with both hands, so the reader could not quickly flip through the pages or skim through the text, as is done now. The reading went on sequentially, line by line, and the physical process itself set a slow rhythm of perception. In addition, ancient texts were most often written without spaces between words and without punctuation marks, the so-called continuous writing, which made the text look like a continuous string of letters. To understand the meaning, the reader had to know the language, grammar, and content in advance, as well as be able to mentally divide the flow of letters into words and phrases. This made reading difficult and required high concentration, so the ability to read was considered a sign of education and was accessible to few. An important feature of ancient reading was that it almost always happened out loud. Even if a person was reading alone, he pronounced the text in a whisper or softly, because the written word was perceived as a fixed speech and not as an independent visual object. It was believed that the text really comes to life only in sound, when it can be heard. That is why libraries and schools in ancient times were filled with the voices of people reading, and the silence common to modern reading rooms was rare there. Reading aloud also helped to better understand and memorize the text, because hearing and speech were connected to the work of memory. Ancient books were often read not for quick information, but for comprehension and memorization. Many texts, especially philosophical, religious, and poetic ones, were intended for repeated rereading. The reader could return to the same place over and over again, reflecting on each sentence. In this sense, reading resembled meditation or intellectual exercise rather than information consumption. It was often a collective reading. One person read the text aloud while the others listened, discussed, and asked questions. This is how laws, myths, chronicles, and sacred texts were read. For most people, hearing was the main way to get to know books, because few people could read on their own. This made reading a social act, a part of communication and the transmission of traditions. Even in late antiquity and the Middle Ages, books remained rare and valuable items. They were copied manually, and every mistake or feature of the handwriting could affect the understanding of the text. The reader was often an interpreter at the same time, because ancient texts required explanations, commentaries, and oral explanations. The fields of the manuscripts were often filled with notes, questions, and reflections, turning the book into a lively dialogue between the author and the reader. Over time, the shape of the book changed. Codices appeared, that is, books with sheets that could be flipped through, which made reading more convenient and made it easier to find the right places. However, even then, reading remained slow and focused. people read fewer texts, but deeper, and often knew them almost by heart. Thus, ancient reading was not a quick glide through the lines, but an intense and thoughtful process in which the text required attention, memory, and the participation of the whole body and voice. The book was perceived not as a stream of information, but as a source of meaning and wisdom, which was treated with respect and patience, allowing words to gradually reveal their meaning. Is nuclear energy dangerous? Nuclear energy is considered one of the most controversial forms of electricity generation because it combines enormous power and potential danger, which arouses both interest and fear among people. Nuclear energy is based on the process of fission of atomic nuclei, most often uranium, which generates a large amount of heat. This heat is used to heat water, turn it into steam, and turn turbines, meaning technically a nuclear power plant works in a similar way to a thermal power plant, only its energy source is different. The main danger of nuclear energy is not related to the generation of electricity itself, but to the radioactive materials that are used in reactors and are formed during their operation. Radioactivity can be harmful to living organisms because ionizing radiation damages cells and DNA, increasing the risk of disease. However, in normal operation, nuclear power plants are designed so that radiation does not go beyond the protective shells. The reactors are surrounded by several levels of protection, including thick concrete and metal structures, and the radiation level around a functioning plant usually does not exceed the natural background. Fears are heightened by major accidents that have left a deep mark on the collective memory. The disasters at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the Fukushima plant have shown that a combination of technical errors, human factors, and extreme conditions can lead to serious consequences. These events have made the word atom a symbol of threat, although in fact such accidents are extremely rare and have led to significant changes in safety regulations. Modern nuclear power relies on the experience of past mistakes and uses more advanced monitoring, automatic cooling, and emergency shutdown systems. Another important aspect of the danger is related to nuclear waste. After use, the fuel remains radioactive and requires long-term storage, sometimes for thousands of years. This creates a difficult task for humanity because it is necessary to ensure the safety of future generations who may not even know about the existence of such storage facilities. At the same time, the volume of nuclear waste is relatively small compared to waste from burning coal or oil, and technologies for their processing and isolation are gradually being improved. If we consider nuclear energy in comparison with other sources, the picture becomes more complicated. In terms of carbon dioxide emissions, nuclear power plants are considered to be among the most environmentally friendly because they emit virtually no greenhouse gases during electricity generation. This makes nuclear energy attractive in the context of combating climate change. At the same time, traditional energy sources, such as coal, cause the deaths of millions of people every year due to air pollution. But they are perceived as less dangerous simply because their harm is distributed over time and space and does not have vivid, catastrophic images. The psychological factor also plays an important role. Radiation is invisible. It cannot be felt directly, and this increases fear because a person cannot rely on the senses. In addition, nuclear energy is associated with weapons of mass destruction, which imposes an additional emotional imprint. However, there is a fundamental difference between nuclear weapons and energy, and the technologies used in power plants are not designed to release energy explosively. As a result, the question of the dangers of nuclear energy has no simple answer. It does carry potential risks, especially if safety regulations are violated. But with proper management and modern technology, these risks can be minimized. Nuclear energy turns out to be not so much absolutely dangerous or safe, as it requires high responsibility, strict control, and long-term thinking, because its consequences can go far beyond one human life. What is the Legion of Honor? The Legion of Honor is the highest state award of France, established in the early 19th century, and has become a symbol of recognition of outstanding services to the country and society. It was founded in 1802 by Napoleon Bonaparte, at a time when France was undergoing profound political and social changes after the Revolution. The old noble orders were abolished, and there was a need for a new system of awards that would value not the origin, but the personal merits of a person. That is why the Legion of Honor was originally conceived as a sign of respect for the military, scientists, artists, engineers, and statesmen who proved themselves to serve France. An important feature of the order was that people of various classes could receive it if their contribution was considered significant. The name Legion of Honor reflects the idea of a community united not by blood and titles, but by honor and service. The order itself has a clear structure of degrees that reflect the level of merit and duration of service, but it is always based on the principle of personal dignity. The badge of the order is a 5-pointed star decorated with a laurel and oak wreath, symbolizing glory and perseverance, and in the center is an image of Marianne, an allegorical image of the French Republic. This visual language highlights the award's connection with the ideals of citizenship and the Republic. The Legion of Honor is awarded not only to French citizens, but also to foreigners if their activities have contributed to the strengthening of culture, science, diplomacy, or humanitarian ties. Thanks to this, it has become an internationally recognized sign of respect and recognition. However, receiving an order is not an automatic consequence of success or popularity. The selection process involves a long-term consideration of merits, recommendations, and compliance with strict criteria. In this sense, the order is not just an award, but a kind of outcome of a life path in which consistency, responsibility, and contribution to a common cause are important. Interestingly, the Legion of Honor combines elements of military and civilian traditions. Initially, he was closely associated with the army, but over time, achievements in peaceful areas began to gain more importance. This reflects the understanding that service to society can take a variety of forms, from protecting the country to developing science or art. In the cultural consciousness of France, the order has become a sign not only of official recognition, but also of a certain moral standard to which they strive. At the same time, disputes often arise around the order, related to whom and for what it should be awarded. These discussions show that the award remains a living element of public life, and not a formal relic of the past. The Legion of Honor also emphasizes the important idea of continuity, because it has existed for more than 200 years and has survived the change of regimes, empires, and republics, retaining its importance. For many awardees, it becomes not just a badge of distinction, but a symbol that their work has been noticed and appreciated at the highest level. Thus, the Legion of Honor is not just a beautiful medal or an element of ceremony, but a complex cultural and historical symbol reflecting the ideas of honor, merit, and service to society that have been formed in France over the centuries and continue to be relevant in the modern world. What is carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide is a chemical compound consisting of one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms, which plays an important and multifaceted role in nature, life on Earth, and human activities. It is colorless, odorless, and tasteless, which is why a person usually does not feel its presence directly, although it is this substance that constantly surrounds us and participates in the key processes of the planet. Carbon dioxide is present in the atmosphere in a relatively small amount, but even this fraction has a huge impact on the climate, plants, and living organisms. It is formed naturally as a result of respiration of animals and humans, decomposition of organic substances, volcanic activity, and gorenje. When a person exhales, they release carbon dioxide as a byproduct of metabolism because cells, receiving energy from nutrients, use oxygen and release carbon dioxide back into the environment. On the contrary, this gas is a valuable resource for plants. During photosynthesis, plants absorb carbon dioxide from the air and use sunlight to convert it into organic substances from which they build their tissues while releasing oxygen. Thus, carbon dioxide and oxygen are in constant circulation, linking plants, animals, and the atmosphere into a single system. Without carbon dioxide, life in our usual form would be impossible, because it is the basis for the formation of plant biomass and hence the entire food chain. In addition to its biological role, carbon dioxide is also important from a physical point of view. It belongs to greenhouse gases, that is, it is able to retain heat in the atmosphere, preventing it from escaping into space. Due to this effect, the temperature on Earth remains high enough for liquid water and life to exist. However, as carbon dioxide concentrations increase, this effect increases, leading to global warming and climate change. In the modern world, humans significantly affect the carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere by burning coal, oil, and gas, cutting down forests, and altering natural ecosystems. These processes release carbon that has been bound in the subsurface or biomass for a long time and return it to the atmosphere. Because of this, carbon dioxide has become a central topic of environmental and climate discussions. At the same time, it is not in itself a poison in the usual sense of the word. In small concentrations, carbon dioxide is harmless and natural to humans. Problems arise when it accumulates in confined spaces where it can displace oxygen and cause a feeling of suffocation, drowsiness, and loss of consciousness. That is why indoor ventilation is of such great importance. In everyday life, carbon dioxide is widely used by humans. Gorenje is used for carbonating beverages, where it creates characteristic bubbles and a feeling of freshness. In fire extinguishers, because it does not support combustion, and in industry, for various technological processes. In the food industry, it helps preserve food by slowing the growth of microorganisms. Interestingly, carbon dioxide also plays the role of a kind of indicator of life. Its presence in the planet's atmosphere can indicate biological or geological processes. Therefore, scientists are carefully studying the content of this gas, not only on Earth, but also on other planets. As a result, carbon dioxide is an example of a substance that cannot be unequivocally called either harmful or useful. It is an integral part of natural cycles, supports life and climate, but if the balance is disturbed, it can become a source of serious problems. Understanding its role helps to see how finely the Earth's system is structured and how closely human activity is linked to processes that at first glance seem invisible, and far removed from everyday experience. Who created the first opera masterpiece? The question of who created the first opera masterpiece does not have an absolutely unambiguous answer, because opera as a genre was born gradually, at the junction of music, poetry, and theater, and its formation was a collective cultural process. Nevertheless, most often the first operatic masterpiece is called the work Orpheus, created by the Italian composer Claudio Monteverdi and first performed in 1607. To understand why this particular essay is considered a starting point, it is important to imagine the cultural atmosphere of the late 16th and early 17th centuries. At this time, interest in antiquity was increasing in Italy, and educated people were striving to revive the ancient Greek theater, in which, as they believed, the text was pronounced or sung to music. A group of poets, musicians, and thinkers, known as the Florentine Camerata, began experimenting with a new style in which music was intended to emphasize the meaning of words rather than distract from them. This is how the idea of a musical drama arose, where the plot unfolds through singing. Before Monteverdi, there were already early operas, such as Daphne and Eurydice by Jacopo Peri, but they were more experiments than full-fledged works of art. In them, the music served an official role and was quite simple. Monteverdi managed to turn a new genre into real art, endowing it with emotional depth, dramatic tension, and musical richness. His Orpheus tells the myth of the poet Orpheus, who descends into the underworld to bring back his beloved Eurydice. And this story was perfect for the new genre, because it itself is associated with the power of music and art. Monteverdi used a variety of musical forms, combining recitative, close to spoken language, with expressive arias and choral episodes. He carefully ensured that the music conveyed the feelings of the characters, their despair, hope, joy, and loss. For the first time, music became not just a decoration of the text, but its full-fledged carrier. In addition, Monteverdi boldly used the orchestra, choosing instruments depending on the scene and mood, which was an innovative decision for his time. All this made Orpheus a work that not only marked the birth of opera, but also set a high artistic standard for future composers. It is also important that Monteverdi's opera was not a court entertainment for a narrow circle, but gradually began to spread and develop, turning into an independent genre with its own tradition. After Orpheus, opera began to evolve rapidly. New plots, styles, and forms appeared. But it was this work that showed that opera is able to touch, excite, and tell complex stories through music. Therefore, when talking about the first opera masterpiece, they usually mean not just the first composition in the genre, but the first work in which the opera revealed its artistic potential. Claudio Monteverdi turned out to be the composer who managed to combine the intellectual quest of his time with a lively human feeling, turning the experiment into an art capable of surviving the centuries. That is why his name is so strongly associated with the birth of opera as a full-fledged and profound musical genre. What is an allusion? An allusion is an artistic device in which an author intentionally makes a reference to a well-known text, image, historical event, myth, work of art, or cultural fact without naming it directly. The word allusion comes from the Latin verb meaning to hint or to play, and its meaning is already embedded in this origin. Allusion presupposes a subtle intellectual game between the author and the reader or viewer. It only works when the person who perceives the work is able to recognize the reference and relate it to their own knowledge. If a direct quote communicates information openly, then the allusion acts covertly. creating an additional layer of meaning. Allusions have been used in literature since ancient times. Ancient authors hinted at myths and legends, medieval writers hinted at biblical stories, and modern authors may refer to films, songs, or internet culture. The allusion allows the author to speak about complex things briefly, because behind one hint, there is a whole layer of associations. When the reader recognizes the allusion, the text begins to open up, becoming deeper and richer. At the same time, the allusion does not require an exact reproduction of the original. It can be altered, ironic, or even reversed in meaning. In this case, the author does not just recall a well-known image, but enters into a dialogue with it. Allusion also helps to connect an individual work with a broad cultural tradition, showing that a new text does not exist in a vacuum, but rather continues or reinterprets existing ideas. In cinema and theater, allusions can manifest themselves through visual images, frame composition, costumes, or music. For example, a certain character's pose or the color scheme of a scene may remind the viewer of a classic painting or cult film, creating a sense of hidden meaning. In everyday speech, people also often use allusions, sometimes without even realizing it. Phrases borrowed from literature or cinema become part of the language and begin to work as cultural codes. By saying Trojan horse or Pandora's box, a person uses an allusion to a myth to express a complex idea in a nutshell. At the same time, allusions can be both serious and ironic. Humor is often based precisely on the unexpected juxtaposition of a modern context with a well-known plot from the past. However, an allusion always implies a certain level of trust in the audience. The author seems to assume that the reader is educated or attentive enough to catch the hint. If this does not happen, the allusion remains unnoticed, but the text does not necessarily lose its meaning completely. It works as an added bonus for those who are able to recognize it. From a philosophical point of view, the allusion reflects the very nature of culture as a continuous conversation between epochs. Each new text builds on the previous ones, even if it does so covertly. The allusion reminds us that human thinking is rarely completely new. Rather, it reinterprets, quotes, and transforms existing forms. That is why allusions are so common in works that strive for depth and layering. They create a recognition effect, and at the same time, make you think about how the past affects the present. Ultimately, allusion is a way of saying more than is said directly, inviting the reader or viewer to participate in creating meaning and making the process of perception quieter, more attentive and thoughtful, like a leisurely unraveling of a cultural riddle. What is a leap year? A leap year is a year in which one additional day is added to the regular calendar to align it with astronomical time and the position of the Earth in orbit around the Sun. In the modern Gregorian calendar, which is used in almost all countries of the world, this day is added to February, making it 29 days instead of the usual 28 days. The reason for the leap year is that the astronomical year, that is, the time it takes for the Earth to complete a complete revolution around the Sun, is approximately 365.2422 days. If you use a calendar with exactly 365 days each year, then over time, the dates will begin to shift relative to the seasonal cycles. For example, spring will gradually come earlier in the calendar, and autumn will come later. To avoid this inconsistency, an additional day is introduced every 4 years. This allows the calendar to stay synchronized with natural seasons and astronomical events, such as the equinoxes and solstices. Leap year rules are arranged quite elegantly. According to the Gregorian calendar, a year is a leap year if it is divisible by 4, But years that are multiples of 100 are not leap years unless they are divisible by 400. For example, 2000 was a leap year, but 1900 was not. This system makes the calendar as accurate as possible and reduces the accumulated error to just one day in several thousand years. The history of leap year dates back to ancient Rome. Back in the Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar in 45 BC, one day was added every 4 years. This simple system worked better than previous lunar or mixed calendars, but over time it turned out that it was also a bit inaccurate because the astronomical year is slightly shorter than 365.25 days. In the 16th century, Pope Gregory XIII reformed the calendar to eliminate the accumulated error, and thus the Gregorian calendar appeared, which is still in use today. Leap day is often perceived by people as special or even mystical, and there are many traditions and superstitions associated with it. In popular beliefs, there were signs and rituals associated with the fact that this day is unusual, and therefore it should be treated with caution. In some countries, February 29th was considered the day when women can propose to men, which has become an interesting social tradition that has survived to the present day. From the point of view of practical life, leap day affects financial, legal, and organizational processes. For example, for accounting, interest calculation, project planning, and contract management, this day should be taken into account in a special way so that all deadlines are correct and fair. Despite the apparent complexity, leap year passes unnoticed for most people. An extra day is perceived as a small addition to time, a chance to do something extra that is usually not enough, whether it's relaxing, working on a project, or celebrating. Astronomically, a leap year reminds us that our calendar is just a conditional system created by man for convenience, and that nature lives by its own laws, regardless of our conventions. This day symbolizes the balance between natural cycles and the human attempt to regulate time, allowing the calendar to remain synchronized with the movement of the Earth around the Sun. Thus, leap year is a practical and cultural phenomenon at the same time, demonstrating how people have adapted their time measurement systems to precise astronomical patterns, and how even one extra day can make a difference in everyday life and traditions. What is yeast? Yeast is a single-celled microorganism belonging to the kingdom of fungi, which play an extremely important role in nature, human biology, and food production. They are tiny living organisms that are not visible to the naked eye, but are able to actively reproduce and convert chemicals into energy, making them indispensable in the food industry. The main biochemical process for which yeast is valued is fermentation. During fermentation, yeast consumes the sugars contained in the raw materials and converts them into carbon dioxide and alcohol. It is thanks to this process that the dough for bread rises, drinks such as beer and wine acquire an alcoholic content, and fermentation products acquire a characteristic taste and aroma. Yeast is especially important in baking because the carbon dioxide it releases fills the dough with bubbles, making it soft, porous, and airy. This effect, seemingly simple, actually requires an understanding of the biological properties of yeast, temperature, humidity, and time. Yeast is alive, and its activity depends on the conditions in which they are located. If the dough is too cold, the yeast slows down its work, and if it is too hot, it dies. In brewing and winemaking, yeast ensures the conversion of sugars into alcohol, as well as creates a complex bouquet of flavors. Different types of yeast are used for different drinks, and the skill of the brewer or winemaker is to select the appropriate strain and create optimal conditions for fermentation. In addition to its practical value, yeast is of interest to science. They serve as model organisms in biology, genetics, and microbiology because their cellular structure is simple and their vital processes are similar to those of other organisms. By studying yeast, scientists have discovered important mechanisms of cell division, heredity, and metabolism, which further helped to understand the work of human cells. In nature, yeast lives almost everywhere. On the surface of fruits, in the soil, on the leaves of plants, in the air and in water. They do not actively parasitize, but participate in the decomposition of organic substances, returning them to the cycle of elements and nutrients. Without yeast, ecosystems would function differently because they accelerate decomposition processes, which contributes to soil fertility and the energy cycle. Historically, humans used yeast long before they understood its biological nature. In ancient civilizations, people noticed that dough or fruit juice left in the air began to thump and become sweet or alcoholic. These observations led to the conscious use of yeast in baking, winemaking, and brewing. It was only in the 19th century that scientists such as Louis Pasteur explained the mechanism of yeast by discovering fermentation as a biochemical process controlled by living organisms. Since then, yeast has become an integral part of both industrial production and laboratory science. In the modern world, yeast is used not only in cooking and beverages, but also in biotechnology for the production of vitamins, medicines, enzymes, and even biofuels. They remain an example of how simple living organisms can have a huge impact on human life, economics, and science. Thus, yeast is a small but extremely important creature, but combines a biological role in the ecosystem, cultural significance in cooking, and industrial value in technology. And their study allows for a deeper understanding of life at the cellular level and the relationship of man with nature. How did the page numbering and table of contents come about? Page numbering and table of contents are elements of a book that today seem so natural that it is difficult to imagine a text without them. But they did not appear immediately, and were the result of the gradual evolution of writing culture and printing. In ancient times, books did not have the structure we are used to. The texts were written on scrolls, papyrus, or parchment, and the reader was guided by their context and memory. There were no pages on the scrolls, and the text was a solid line, so finding the right place was difficult and required careful reading or the help of a mentor. With the advent of codices, books with sheets stapled together, it became possible to gradually systematize the text. The pages being flipped made it possible to mark the order of reading, but for a long time, numbering was not used, and the text was perceived as a continuous sequence. The first attempts at page numbering are found in medieval manuscripts, when monks copied books for monastic libraries. They put numbers in the margins or used signs to make it easier to navigate long texts, especially in theological treatises, where they often had to return to quotations or comments. These numbers were more of a service, designed to make it easier to work with the text than for the convenience of the reader. The table of contents developed in parallel. It allowed us to systematize the content of the book and gave the reader the opportunity to understand the structure of the text in advance. Early tables of contents included only the main sections or chapters, sometimes without specifying the pages, and were guided simply by the names of the sections. With the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the 15th century, the process of creating books changed dramatically. Printed books have become more accessible, circulation has increased, and the need for easy text navigation has increased. It was during this period that the page numbering and the table of contents acquired a modern look. The pages became numbered, and the tables of contents contained links to specific pages, which allowed the reader to quickly find the right material. Over time, the numbering technique became precise and standardized. The header or footer with the page number became a familiar element, and the tables of contents turned into detailed diagrams reflecting the structure of the book, subsections, and even notes. The practical value of these innovations was enormous. The page numbering made it possible to conveniently quote the text, conduct academic discussions, and create scientific papers. The table of contents provided the reader with a guide and saved time, especially when working with encyclopedias, dictionaries, and legal documents. It also influenced the perception of the text. The reader could understand the logic of the presentation in advance, highlight important topics, and plan the study of the material. From a cultural point of view, the appearance of page numbering and tables of contents reflects the transition from oral and slow, thoughtful reading to a more rational, organized way of working with information. This became part of the process of standardization of knowledge and education, which required accuracy and the possibility of systematization. In the modern world, with the advent of electronic books and digital texts, the functions of page numbering and tables of contents remain, although they take on new forms. Hyperlinks, bookmarks, and interactive tables of contents perform the same role as traditional elements, allowing you to navigate through a huge amount of information. Thus, page numbering and table of contents are not just a technical detail of a book, but the result of centuries of development of written culture, a tool that has made reading more convenient, orderly, and meaningful, reflecting a person's desire to organize knowledge, facilitate access to it, and create systems in which information becomes manageable and accessible to anyone who wants to study it. Why do we need thermal insulation? Thermal insulation is a set of materials and technologies designed to reduce heat transfer between objects or spaces. That is, to preserve heat inside a room or structure and protect it from loss. It is used in construction, industry, transportation, and everyday life, and plays a key role in human comfort, energy saving, and environmental protection. The main function of thermal insulation is to slow down the movement of thermal energy from warmer objects to colder ones. In nature, heat is transmitted in three ways: through conduction, convection, and radiation. Thermal insulation materials are designed to reduce these processes by creating a barrier that reduces energy loss. In construction, thermal insulation is used in walls, roofs, floors, windows, and doors. Without it, buildings would quickly cool down in winter and overheat in summer, which would lead to discomfort and huge costs for heating and air conditioning. Modern thermal insulation materials are created taking into account physical properties. They must be light, durable, resistant to moisture, fire, and the effects of microorganisms, as well as durable. Examples of such materials include mineral wool, glass wool, styrofoam, polyurethane foam, as well as modern nanomaterials and aerogels. Each of them works on the principle of creating many small air cells that slow down heat transfer, because air is a poor conductor of thermal energy. In addition to reducing heat loss, thermal insulation performs secondary but important functions. It reduces noise exposure, protects against condensation and moisture, prevents mold formation, and promotes a healthier indoor climate. In industry, thermal insulation protects equipment, pipelines, and reservoirs, reducing heat losses and preventing overheating or overcooling of technological processes. This is especially important in enterprises with chemical, food, or energy industries, where stable temperatures directly affect the safety and efficiency of production. The energy efficiency of buildings directly depends on the quality of thermal insulation. Heat loss through poorly insulated walls, windows, or roof can account for up to half of the energy consumed for heating. Thus, properly selected and installed thermal insulation saves resources, reduces energy consumption costs, and reduces greenhouse gas emissions, making it an important tool in combating climate change. Historically, people have used various materials to keep warm: straw, reeds, felt, wool, animal skin, and wood. These natural insulation materials helped to maintain comfort in extreme climatic conditions. With the development of technology, synthetic materials with increased stability, lightness, and efficiency have appeared. Thermal insulation also plays an important role in transportation. In cars, planes, trains, and ships, it reduces energy loss, maintains a comfortable temperature, and increases passenger and cargo safety. Without thermal insulation, the engines and cooling systems would work less efficiently, and the interior would be exposed to extreme temperatures. In everyday life, thermal insulation helps to maintain comfort when using household appliances, refrigerators, ovens, water heaters, and air conditioners, making them more energy efficient. In addition, effective thermal insulation contributes to the durability of building structures, protecting them from temperature fluctuations, humidity, and cracks. As a result, thermal insulation is not just a layer of material, but a complex system that combines the physics of heat transfer, engineering design, and environmental responsibility. It allows a person to create comfortable living and working conditions, save resources, and preserve the natural environment, while simultaneously being an important element of architecture and technological infrastructure. Its importance cannot be overestimated. From household comfort and reducing energy consumption to preserving the global climate, thermal insulation remains one of the fundamental technologies that ensure a balance between humans, their environment, and natural processes. Where, how, and when did religion originate? Religion is a complex of beliefs, rituals, moral norms, and symbolic systems that connect a person with ideas about the supernatural, a higher power, or a cosmic order. The emergence of religion cannot be tied to one specific date or place, because its formation was a gradual process, inseparable from the development of human society, consciousness, and culture. The earliest forms of religious practice appeared back in the Paleolithic era, tens of thousands of years ago, when people first began to meaningfully interpret the world around them and their feelings. Our ancestors observed the sun, moon, stars, thunderstorms, forests, and animals, and searched for cause and effect relationships, explaining them through forces that could not be seen. They understood that hunting, harvest, health, and the life of the group as a whole depended on these forces, and gradually the first magical and ceremonial actions appeared: spells, drawings on cave walls, ritual objects, and symbolic figures, such as images of animals or anthropomorphic creatures. These actions can be considered the first steps towards religion, because they were based on the belief that certain actions can affect life and the world by connecting the material with the immaterial. With the development of society and the transition to a sedentary lifestyle, the advent of agriculture and cities, religion has become more systematic. People began to formulate concepts of gods and spirits, build sanctuaries, temples and altars, create mythologies and rituals that regulated behavior, transmitted knowledge, and strengthened social ties. Religion played the role of a moral code, explained the order of things, and helped govern society by providing rules for interaction between people, maintaining the power of leaders and priests, and shaping cultural identity. Different peoples created different religious systems, but the common features remain: faith in higher powers, the presence of rituals, sacred texts or oral traditions, moral precepts, and symbols that unite the community. In ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and China, religion already had a complex structure, including pantheons of gods, ancestor worship, priestly institutions, and festivals related to the cycle of nature. Religion arose as a way of explaining the incomprehensible, protecting against dangers, regulating social relations, and maintaining a person's psychological stability. Over time, it became more complicated, divided into numerous directions, schools, and philosophical systems. In the history of mankind, religion has always been closely linked with culture, art, and science. She inspired architecture, painting, literature, and music, shaped holidays and the calendar, and ensured the transfer of knowledge from generation to generation. The influence of religion on morality, ethics, and social structure cannot be overestimated. Many laws, norms of behavior, and ideas about good and evil were formed under its influence. Modern research in archaeology, anthropology, and comparative religion shows that religious practices existed in almost all early societies, regardless of region, indicating a deep human need to find meaning, explain the world, and connect with something greater than oneself. Thus, religion did not arise in one place and not at one moment, but as a natural product of human thinking, the need to understand the incomprehensible, explain the patterns of life, and form social cohesion. Its roots go back to the Paleolithic. Its development took place through magical practices, myths, priestly institutions, and religious buildings. And modern religious culture is the result of thousands of years of evolution of beliefs, symbols, and rituals that unite people in the search for meaning, order, and harmony with the world around them. Religion is at the same time a tool of understanding, moral regulation, and cultural expression, showing how a person has sought and continues to strive to connect the visible and invisible world into a single whole. What is soap made from? Soap is a product that people have been using for thousands of years to cleanse their bodies and clothes, as well as in industry and agriculture. It is a mixture of chemicals that is formed as a result of a reaction called saponification, when fats or oils react with alkali. The main components of soap are fatty acids and alkali, most often sodium or potassium hydroxide. Fats can be of animal origin, such as pork, beef, or sheep fat, as well as vegetable origin, such as olive, coconut, palm, or soybean oil. Fats consist of molecules called triglycerides, which, when interacting with alkali, break down to form glycerin and salts of fatty acids, soap itself. This process has been known to mankind since ancient times. Archaeological finds show that soap was produced by the Sumerians around 2800 BC, mixing plant ashes with animal fats. Even then, it was used as a means for washing tissues and the body, as well as a medicine for skin diseases. Over time, the soap production technology has improved. In antiquity and the Middle Ages, it was prepared manually by heating a mixture of fats and alkali in boilers, then cooled and cut into bars. In Europe, soap was often made from olive oil or fats with the addition of herbs, aromatic oils, and dyes. These additives gave the soap a pleasant smell, color, and additional properties, such as antiseptic or emollient action. In the 19th century, with the development of the chemical industry, new methods for the production of alkali and synthetic fatty acids appeared, which made it possible to produce soap in industrial batches. Fragrances, dyes, skin additives, and special formulas for different types of soap began to be used: toilet, household, baby, laundry soap, and even decorative. Soap has unique properties that make it an effective cleaning agent. Soap molecules have a double structure. One part is attracted to water, and the other to fat or oil. When soap comes into contact with dirt, this structure allows you to separate greasy or oily particles from the surface of the skin or fabric, mixing them with water and washing away dirt. It is this mechanism that makes soap an indispensable hygiene product. In addition to its cleansing function, soap also protects the skin and prevents the spread of germs, especially when used with sufficient mechanical treatment, for example, friction and foaming. In modern production, substances are added that soften the skin, impart antibacterial properties, preserve flavor, and prolong shelf life. Today, soap is made both manually and in factories, using automated lines where ingredients are precisely dosed, temperature and reaction time are controlled, and the finished soap is molded, dried, and packaged. Along with traditional products, there are liquid soaps, gels, and specialized skincare products. Soap is an example of how science, chemistry, and culture combine with practical human needs. It originated from simple, natural materials, but over time has evolved into a product with diverse properties that satisfies hygienic, aesthetic, and even medical purposes. Its composition and production show how humans have learned to use chemical reactions to create a safe and healthy product that ensures cleanliness, comfort, and health. Thus, soap is not just a detergent, but the result of a 1,000-year evolution of knowledge, technology, and culture, combining natural resources, chemical processes, and human experience to meet the fundamental need for cleanliness and hygiene, while remaining relevant. How did you become a scribe? Scribes are people whose profession was to create, rewrite, and store texts, and their role was key in ancient and medieval societies where writing was a rare and valuable skill. The process of becoming a scribe was long and complex, requiring not only learning writing skills, but also a deep understanding of language, culture, religion, and often mathematics. Scribe training took place in different ways in different civilizations, but everywhere it began with an early introduction to writing. In ancient Egypt, for example, future scribes studied hieroglyphic writing, which included hundreds of characters and required excellent memory and perseverance. The training started with simple symbols and gradually became more complicated, moving on to composing sentences and texts. The scribes' students spent hours practicing on papyrus or clay tablets, repeating the signs and practicing handwriting. Scribes had to know the grammar, vocabulary, and stylistic norms of their time, as well as culture and history, in order to correctly convey the meaning of the text. In Mesopotamia, the training included mastering cuneiform writing on clay tablets. The students wrote millions of small wedges, studying their sequence and combinations. Mistakes were never forgiven, and skill was judged on accuracy, and speed. The scribe was not just an artisan, but an important figure in society. He recorded laws, business records, religious texts, literary works, and contracts, playing the role of a guardian of knowledge and culture. In the Middle Ages in Europe, scribe training most often took place in monastic schools, where sacred texts, liturgies, and philosophical works were copied. The monk scribes used parchment, quills, ink, and special tables to teach writing. They developed not only calligraphic skills, but also an understanding of the structure of the text, the organization of paragraphs, the design of capital letters, red lines, and illustrations. The training was rigorous and disciplined, requiring perseverance, accuracy, and patience. Every mistake could ruin expensive material. The scribe had to be able not only to rewrite the text, but also to correct errors, interpret the meaning, and sometimes translate from one language to another. In cultures with a high value for writing, scribes were highly respected, sometimes holding administrative and legal positions, as the ability to work with texts was a rare and strategically important skill. With the development of printing, the role of the scribe was gradually transformed. But the tradition of teaching writing and accuracy was preserved in the form of calligraphy and book decoration. Scribes have always been a link between generations, passing on knowledge, laws, and literature, ensuring the preservation of culture and information. They created not just a text, but a system of symbols that allowed society to develop, store experience, and learn. The process of becoming a scribe required a combination of discipline, patience, perseverance, and intellectual development. It was a path from simple copying of signs to a deep understanding of the language, style, structure of the text, and cultural values. Scribes were able to concentrate, maintain accuracy and quality of work, which made them indispensable in any era where writing mattered. Thus, becoming a scribe is, at the same time, teaching writing skills, fostering patience and attentiveness, mastering culture and history, and developing the ability to manage knowledge and information. Scribes served as a bridge between the past and the future, ensuring the continuity of human experience and preserving accumulated knowledge for future generations. Their role shows how valuable and important the ability to work with text was, and how it influenced the development of civilization, science, religion, and culture in general. What is fortune-telling? Fortune-telling is the practice of predicting the future or revealing hidden information about the present through symbolic, mystical, or random signs and methods, which exists in almost all cultures and eras. It arose as a way to gain a sense of control over the unknown and uncertainty, to help a person make decisions, understand events happening around them, and look beyond ordinary perception. Fortune-telling can take many different forms. This can be reading signs of nature, such as the flight of birds, the movement of clouds, or the shape of clouds. Interpreting objects such as animal bones, stones, grains, leaves, or using specially created systems such as tarot cards, runes, Chinese I Ching, coffee grounds, and bones. Each culture has formed its own methods of divination based on symbolism, beliefs, and ideas about the world. In ancient times, fortune-telling performed a social and practical function. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China, predictions were used to select planting dates, wage war, conclude treaties, and make political decisions. Priests, or specially trained people, interpreted the signs and made predictions that were considered the advice of gods or spirits, and their authority was often indisputable. In the Middle Ages, fortune-telling retained a religious or mystical connotation. People turned to the stars, angels, sacred texts, magical rituals, and amulets in order to understand the will of the divine or avoid danger. At the same time, it was often combined with folk beliefs, omens, and customs, becoming part of everyday life, where observations of nature, dreams, and random events were interpreted as signs. Symbolism and interpretation are always present in fortune-telling. An object or event that seems random acquires meaning, and the person learns to see patterns that help him understand the world. For example, a tarot card or rune does not just show a specific object, but serves as a visual and metaphorical reflection of the situation, inner feelings, and possible consequences. An important feature of fortune-telling is its psychological effect. It allows a person to focus, think about a situation, make a decision, or prepare for the future, creating a sense of order in a chaotic world. Even when the prediction doesn't come true, the very process of analysis and reflection helps you evaluate your own actions, opportunities, and consequences. Modern forms of fortune-telling have become a combination of tradition, psychology, and art. Professional fortune-tellers use symbolic systems, and in popular culture, fortune-telling is represented in books, games, movies, and online services. Scientific research shows that fortune-telling often plays the role of psychological support, allowing people to reduce anxiety, structure their thoughts, and feel in control of circumstances. Despite this, fortune-telling has historically influenced culture, religion, politics, and art, leaving traces in myths, legends, literature, and architecture. It formed ideas about fate, free will, responsibility of a person, and his place in the world. Fortune-telling also highlights the universal human need to search for meaning, explain the unknown, and turn to symbols that help make sense of life and its unpredictability. Psychologically, fortune-telling develops attention to detail, observation, and the ability to interpret symbols, teaching a person to see connections and hidden meanings. It combines rational observation and emotional intuition, creating a balance between logic and faith. Thus, fortune-telling is not just a prediction of the future, but a cultural and psychological phenomenon that combines history, mythology, symbolism, and the human need to understand the world. It shows how for thousands of years, people have been looking for ways to look beyond the visible, to find answers to questions about fate, moral choice, and life circumstances. Fortune-telling simultaneously reflects the desire for control, the desire to explain the incomprehensible, and artistic imagination, turning random events, signs, and images into a system that helps navigate life and better understand yourself and the world around you, making it less frightening and more understandable.